Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SCCS Bangalore 2020. Thank you for joining us. Before we start our inaugural session, I just have a few announcements. So during the session, you will see a tab to your right, and there is a Q&A tab as well as a chat tab. Please post your questions in the Q&A tab and not in the chat tab. That's the Q&A tab is what the moderators will be checking, and they will communicate your questions to the speakers. At the end of every session, we'll tell you exactly where to go next and what to do, so there's no confusion. So please stick around till the end of the session and don't log out too soon. And now officially on behalf of the organizing committee of SCCS Bangalore 2020, welcome to the conference. We're really thrilled to have you all here. To start us off in our inaugural session, we have representatives from our organizing institutions. That is the Center of Ecological Sciences, Indian Institute of Science, Nature Conservation Foundation, and the National Center for Biological Sciences, who will say a few words and get us going today. So first, we have Dr. Moushami Ghosh, the Academic Dean of the Nature Conservation Foundation. Over to you, Moushami.
A very good morning to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the SCCS Bangalore 2020 on behalf of the Nature Conservation Foundation. We have been part of SCCS Bangalore's journey since its inception in 2010 and are delighted and proud to support this immensely popular conference, which has done an exemplary job of encouraging budding conservationists in the region to explore the science and practice of conservation. This year, as we all struggle against the unprecedented circumstances imposed by the global pandemic, I must first commend the members of the organizing committee for rising to the challenge and putting together such an exciting schedule for the conference. Understandably, we are all meeting virtually this year, a novel experience for most of us, for whom this conference has become an annual fixture to learn, exchange ideas, connect, and network. I don't have to preach to the choir, but this year of the COVID-19 pandemic reinforces how important it is for us to conserve our biodiversity, adopt more sustainable practices, and ensure equality and justice for all in the face of a changing world. In these challenging times, I believe the work and experiences that you'll bring to this conference will help us all contribute towards a better future. I would like to conclude by encouraging all of you to make the most of the conference and participate actively in all the talks and discussions through the digital platform over the next 3 days. I wish everyone a successful and fruitful conference. My best wishes to all of you. Once again, I welcome you all. I'll now invite Dr. Jayashree Ratnam of the National Center for Biological Sciences to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Moushami and Marianne, and I join both of them in welcoming all of you here this morning. So a very good morning to all of you. I'm speaking today on behalf of the National Center for Biological Sciences, or NCBS as we all refer to it, its director, Professor Satyajit Meya, and the Wildlife Biology and Conservation Program that has been ongoing at NCBS from 2004. So on behalf of all of us, a very warm welcome to this 11th edition of SCCS, the Student Conference in Conservation Science, Bangalore. NCBS as an organization is deeply invested in training and facilitating young researchers in conservation. And in this context, it has been our privilege to support SCCS right from its very beginnings, and we will continue to do so in the future. In the decade since it was started by a group of passionate conservationists who wanted to encourage young researchers to explore the science and practice of conservation, it has been a pleasure to see how SCCS has grown into an important platform for aspiring student conservationists from South and Southeast Asia and Africa to meet and interact with each other and the wider community of researchers and practitioners, to present their work and to exchange knowledge, ideas, and experiences as they embark on this career. And as Moushami said, and I will echo, today conservation science and action are more important than ever, as the pandemic has shown us loud and clear, the well-being of nature and that of human societies is more closely intertwined than ever. And accelerating rates of climate change, biodiversity loss, land and ocean land and ocean degradation mean that there will be complex and urgent challenges which we will need to solve with rigorous science and careful action. So the field that you all have chosen to enter is incredibly important, guys. And we need many more young people like you to tackle these challenges and steward our planet safely into the future. So thank you all for choosing to do this. Your work in the years to come will matter. And let's get started right now with what I hope will be a very diverse and interesting conference. Many different talks, posters, and discussions that you will attend in the coming 3 days, and that I hope will invigorate and inspire all of you. And to kick us off then, I'm very pleased to introduce the speaker for our opening plenary session, Professor Asmita Kabra from the Ambedkar University School of Human Ecology at New Delhi. Dr. Kabra works at the interface of developmental studies and political ecology. She has been particularly interested in rural livelihoods, agrarian change, and rural education. Her extensive and in-depth work on conservation-induced displacements of rural communities has provided important insights into the long-term economic and social impacts of such displacements. She is the founder and president of the NGO Adarshila, and a founder trustee of the NGO Samrakshan Trust, both of which work for sustainable and dignified livelihoods for rural communities and improved rural education in the dryland forested areas in Chambal in central India. Dr. Kabra also has decades of teaching and student mentoring experience. She was a lecturer at Delhi University for many years before she joined Ambedkar. And with that, let me turn it over to her. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Kabra.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Jayashree, and good morning, everyone. And it's such a privilege to be at the SCCS. And I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I have been with the SCCS almost since its inception, and it's I'll echo Maushami and Jayashree in saying that it's deeply satisfying to see the breadth, depth, and the vitality of this conference grow over the years. As I speak to you from my living room here in Delhi, I really miss the J.N. Tata Auditorium and the spaces outside the auditorium where we hung out and chatted between sessions during the non-virtual, the real SCCSs. And of course, the wonderful IISc campus and all the various friends I've made over the years in Bangalore. However, the organizing team really deserve huge appreciation for having put this event together in virtual mode at short notice. And I have to say that it's definitely better than not having the SCCS at all. And if one is looking for silver linings, hopefully this will also help us to reach a much wider audience at a much lower cost and with a smaller ecological footprint, I guess. Diving right in, I'd like to begin my talk today with a celebrated conservation success story from Central India, from Central and West India. And this story dates back to long before conservation as an idea became popular among the country's upper and middle classes. The last remaining free-ranging population of the Asiatic lion, Panthera leopersica, was to be found in the Gir forests of Gujarat in the mid-late 19th century. Since the 1870s, the successive Nawabs of Junagadh, in whose territory the Gir forests lay, passed several laws to protect lions from widespread trophy hunting that was prevalent at the time, and thus probably saved the species from near certain extinction that could have occurred by the first half of the 20th century. And the recent launch of Project Lion on the lines of Project Tiger and Project Elephant indicate the continued importance placed by our leaders on this charismatic species. Next slide, please, Pani. Thank you. The lion is referred to very often in terms of pride and self-identity or asmita. And I would say that from the princes of long ago to the prime ministers of today, it would seem that politics is deeply intertwined with the story of the Asiatic lion in India. And it is towards this politics that I want to draw your attention today. And if there is one point that I want to underscore in my talk today, it is this, that doing good conservation requires an in-depth and robust and continuous attention to not just the science, but also the politics and the anti-politics of conservation. And what is anti-politics is something I will come to later on in this talk. So in the mid-1990s, scientists in India were worried about the vulnerability of a genetically isolated and expanding lion population in the Gir forests, which is the last place where a free-ranging population was, and it's a hugely human-dominated landscape. And episodes from elsewhere in the world, for example, Serengeti, showed that isolated populations in such a location were vulnerable to disease, fire, other disasters. And scientists like Dr. Ravi Chelam and others argued for the creation of a second home for the Asiatic lion. Also, they called for strong collaboration between conservation biologists and protected area managers so that effective and evidence-based conservation of lions could be ensured. And what's followed this is a story that many of you would be quite familiar with, but I'll just give you a snapshot of that story. So the government of India initiated an ambitious 20-year, 4-stage project for Asiatic lion reintroduction in 1995, with the stated goal of reintroducing a pride of Asiatic lions from Gir in Gujarat to the Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh. In northern Madhya Pradesh. It was hoped that within 20 years, a stable second population would have been established in the grasslands and the meadows of the Kuno sanctuary. Today, in 2020, almost 25 years later, the project continues to languish, despite a Supreme Court intervention in 2013, despite a canine distemper outbreak for the last 2 years in Gir in Gujarat, and despite sustained pressure from global and Indian conservationists. Now, the Lion Conservation Project is a saga of interlocked contests at multiple levels. So on the one hand, the forest bureaucracies of Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, and the government of India are locked in a legal battle were locked in a legal battle in India's Supreme Court, which was largely about the scientific validity of lion translocation from Gir to Kuno. Meanwhile, NGOs and academics, media and politicians of various hues took sides in this battle, which to me was a battle it was a battle for legitimacy on of the idea of lion translocation itself. But that is one of the things that my talk today is not going to be about. Around the same time, social scientists and human rights activists have locked horns with conservationists over the adverse impacts of displacement from the forests of Kuno on the Saharia Adivasi who had to make way for the Lion Project, and now about potential displacement of Maldhari people from the Gir landscape in Gujarat. However, that is the second thing that my talk today is not about. So let me emphasize this. Today, I will not talk about these very important conservation debates around the readiness of the Kuno landscape for a successful lion reintroduction, nor will I discuss the ill impacts of exclusionary conservation on forest-dependent people. Although both of these are very important issues, and I have worked on them for over 2 decades now. And these are issues that all of us should be and are concerned about. Instead, I will talk today about how social science thinking can help us to make sense of the success or failure of conservation initiatives by helping us to come to grips with the politics of conservation. So, using 2 decades of learning from how the Lion Reintroduction Project unfolded in the Kuno landscape. I will ask a slightly strange but a very interesting question. And this question is inspired by the work of James Ferguson, who asked it first in the context of a World Bank funded international development project in the landlocked Southern African country of Lesotho. And the question is the following. What do ambitious projects manage to do apart from failing in their stated objectives? So I'm going to try, so what do projects that fail manage to do apart from failing? And I will try to show you the analytical power of this shift in gaze towards the unintended outcomes of large-scale projects. So thank you for the next slide. So take a look at the image on your screen, please. At first glance, of course, you will see Mona Lisa. And if you don't look carefully, that's probably all that you will see. But start looking more carefully for other things in this image, and you will probably see a very large orange tabby cat staring you right in the face, right in the middle of this image, where Mona Lisa's neck is. Yeah, spot the cat. Look even more carefully, and you will find several other hidden or even obvious faces, patterns in the image in front of you. And here's one of my key messages for today. What you see depends on what you're focusing on. This is the power of dominant narratives. They precondition us into looking at things in a certain way and prevent us, we can stay on the previous slide, they prevent us from looking at other things that might be equally obvious but are obscured by the power of dominant narratives. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now look again at this image on your screen, just to do the same exercise. So bearded old man with wavy hair, but also a horse with a rider, and a person in a yellow shroud, bottom right-hand corner of the image, on the banks of a flowing river. Yeah, so the point I'm making is the following. It is important to focus on why the Lion Reintroduction Project failed in its stated objective of bringing lions from Gir in Gujarat to Kuno in Madhya Pradesh to establish a second viable population. But it will be equally important and productive for those interested in effective biodiversity conservation to focus on what else did the Lion Reintroduction Project do in Kuno apart from failing to bring lions. What else happened, in other words, in and around the forests of Kuno while it was still waiting for lions? Next slide, please. So the power of this shift in gaze is immediate and dramatic. The Kuno landscape did not remain a place frozen in time waiting for the lions to arrive. It was not like Sleeping Beauty waiting for a kiss from the prince to wake her up from her deep slumber. And today, in the time that I have, I will give you 5 small stories or vignettes from the Kuno landscape to demonstrate this fact that while the lions did not arrive, a lot of other things happened in the landscape, and we need to be able to shift our gaze to those to be able to learn from those episodes. Next slide, please. So, story or vignette number 1. So, according to a petition filed before the Centrally Empowered Committee of the Supreme Court, at the peak of summer in June 2004, around 250 feral rhesus macaques captured from Delhi were released in and around the Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary. These monkeys were transported in trucks from the Delhi Zoo to be rehabilitated in the wild. And this was in response to a litigation by animal welfare organizations that were protesting the fact that monkeys were cruelly imprisoned in cramped cages in the Delhi Zoo. And the courts directed that this should stop and the monkeys should be rehabilitated in the wild. Now, according to media reports and according to my own interviews in the field, because I was there in the villages of Kuno, doing my PhD fieldwork at that point of time, the monkey-laden trucks passed the villages which were displaced from Kuno and resettled on its periphery. And these villages at that point of time were struggling for water and rebuilding their livelihoods due to a severe drought that was ongoing in 2004. And the overall sense that one got about this whole business of villages moving out and monkeys moving in was, that there's something very bizarre going on. But there are several frameworks or ways of thinking in the social sciences that can help us to make sense of this episode. And a lot of these frameworks involve debates around morals and ethics. One of the frameworks that I find really illuminating is the notion of biopower, which is defined by the French philosopher Michel Foucault as the ability, I quote, to foster life or disallow it to the point of death. And I believe this is a very useful concept for thinking about which lives, including human and non-human lives, are allowed to continue to live and which others are permitted to die. Who gets to decide this? On whose behalf? And with what consequences on different groups? And I think that engaging with concepts like biopower can provide a great way to foster meaningful conversations between people who are passionate about diverse but connected issues. For instance, issues of biodiversity conservation, issues of animal welfare, and issues of the rights of indigenous people. In a situation like the reintroduction of feral urban monkeys, all these interconnected but diverse issues were playing out on the same landscape. And it's important to think about ways in which we can make sense of this. Of course, I wouldn't have the time to do that today. So let me take you to story number 2 from the Kuno landscape. Next slide, please. Thank you. So at around the same time in 2005, 2006, the government of Uttar Pradesh, neighboring and across the Chambal on the other side of Madhya Pradesh, rode on the back of the rhetoric of lion conservation and made plans to establish a 371-acre lion safari park on the border of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. According to a BBC report, which I have just placed in front of you, the idea of setting up this safari in the bandit badlands of Chambal was also to supposedly to improve the law and order situation in this notoriously unsafe area. Next slide, please. Thanks. Today, a quick search on the internet will show you that the park, the Lion Safari Park, is indeed up and running, but it is located on the outskirts of Etawah, which was the constituency of the then Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. And the Lion Safari Park is pitched as a favorite picnic destination for the emerging urban hubs of Etawah and Mainpuri. It offers visitors, we are told, a drive-through experience of deer, antelope, bear, and leopard safaris, but not a lion safari. And it contains a captive lion breeding center, though, which we are told has lions which were brought mainly from zoos in Gujarat. The park, by the way, also houses a steam locomotive and Vijayant tanks from the Indian Army. Now, while the initial narrative of the Lion Safari Park was about civilizing the unruly badlands of Chambal, the safari eventually served a very different purpose of establishing tourism and outdoor entertainment facilities in this rapidly urbanizing but somewhat marginal part of Uttar Pradesh. The Lion and Safari and Captive Breeding Center or park, in my view, is an important marker of a patriarchal, hyper-masculine state, and the location of the park in the constituency of the ruling party, the then ruling party's senior-most leader, is perhaps meant to signal something entirely different from conservation. And I would venture that the target audience for which this was done is probably not listening to today's talk. Yeah. In a similar vein, the Asiatic lion occupies pride of place in Gujarati self-identity or Asmita. It is regularly invoked, the lion is regularly invoked by Gujarati leaders cutting across party lines to rally an otherwise deeply divided society, divided on the lines of caste, on the lines of religion. And I would argue that the lion is a common symbol, and anxieties about losing this symbolic importance of Gujarat as the last remaining home of the Asiatic lion is routinely harnessed politically for other purposes. Next slide, please. So let's move to the third story from the Kuno landscape. Um, the Kuno landscape, as you might know, is also the selected site for an on-again, off-again project to introduce African cheetahs. Originally, there was an idea of bringing in Asian cheetahs from Iran, but then eventually African cheetahs from Namibia. The project was initially rejected by the Supreme Court on grounds of conservation non-viability, but recently it has been resurrected by the same court on the grounds that it will highlight the importance of conservation of grasslands and the grassland forest mosaics of this part of India, semi-arid India. And now I will not go into too many details of this particular story, except to say that insights from India's environmental history can help us to understand the key and perhaps disproportionate role played by influential individuals and institutions in actually driving conservation policy in the country. So we've already sort of spoken about how rulers of erstwhile princely states uh, played an important role, and I would argue continue to play an important role in determining the main thrust of conservation policy um, since the mid 1970s, when India's environmentalism was sort of getting established. And today's conservation landscape bears the imprint of these individuals and these institutions, and their influence on conservation policy is actually vital to explaining what actually happens on ground zero. And once again, if I have to make sense of what is going on with lions and cheetahs and introductions and reintroductions, I would turn to the social sciences for insights into the complex relationship between state actors in conservation and non-state actors over time and across space, especially in the context of an increasing orientation towards market-based or neoliberal economic policies and conservation policies. So enough of that story for now, and I'm happy to pick it up later during Q&A if people feel inclined to sort of discuss this in more detail. Next slide, please. So we are moving to story number 4. And story number 4 of the unintended outcomes, or what was happening to the Kuno landscape while the lions were not coming, has to do with tigers. And since 2011, the forests of Kuno have also become the adopted home of at least 6, and some say more than 6, around 11 tigers that have migrated from the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve across the border from neighboring Rajasthan. And this adds yet another layer of complexity to the politics of lion conservation and lion reintroduction in Kuno, as has been discussed widely in the media. On the one hand, of course, the arrival of tigers in Kuno from Ranthambore should be reason to rejoice, because it seems to indicate that an intact corridor exists between Kuno and Ranthambore, which can be good news, right? Next slide, please. However, it has also created tensions among the diverse stakeholders speaking for lions, tigers, and cheetahs. So the entrance gate of the Kuno sanctuary from the part where the resettled villages are seems to be sort of, struggling which animal to showcase: tigers, lions, what is to be done, cheetahs. And it has, so as I was saying, it has created tensions among the diverse stakeholders who are speaking for tigers, lions, cheetahs, birds, not to mention those speaking for Adivasis and other forest-dependent communities living on the palm forest fringe. Now, one of the objections of the Gujarat Forest Department, which they had raised in the Supreme Court, was about whether it's feasible to introduce lions in Kuno, where there is a possibility of potential conflict between tigers and lions. The chosen way to fix this problem by the Madhya Pradesh Forest Department has been to double the size of the Kuno conservation area. And this has been done in the last 2 years, and to raise its conservation status from a wildlife sanctuary to a national park. And this in turn has a series of cascading effects. So the sort of voluntary relocation of tigers from Ranthambore to Kuno in turn will involve the bumping up of the status to the national park and probably further displacement of at least 2 more Adivasi settlements. And I believe planning of these resettlements is currently underway. And it is likely that these villagers will be relocated under a voluntary relocation scheme similar to ones that have already been administered to almost 18,000 households in tiger reserves in India since 2006. Under the aegis of the National Tiger Conservation Authority. So complicated and definitely not frozen in time, a landscape that is rapidly evolving. And this takes me to the final vignette or short story for today. Next slide, please. Since 2011, 7 villages relocated from Kuno Sanctuary and resettled on its periphery, as well as 5 other adjacent or host Adivasi villages have been facing the threat of another relocation for a proposed mid-size irrigation dam, which is likely to submerge their homes and fields. Now, in the last 8 years, the people of these villages have held meetings and sit-ins and dharnas. They have refused to work for the irrigation department engineers who were trying to carry out site surveys for this dam. They have written petitions to the local district authorities. They have collected money from their meager earnings to send a delegation to the chief minister's office to register their fears and concerns. Curiously, however, the office of the subdivisional magistrate of this district possesses a resolution signed by the sarpanches of the 2 largest villages and more than 100 villagers who are scheduled for this second displacement, where these villagers have signed a panchnama in support of diverting forest land next to their villages for construction of this irrigation dam. Now, how does one make sense of these completely opposing narratives within the same village, often by the same individuals? Now, the social science literature on development-induced displacement has several examples and explanations for this. To make sense of this entire episode, I would invite you once again to shift your gaze from the written resolution of the Gram Sabha, which gives consent, to the hidden or not so hidden transcripts behind the consent document. Let me just stop for a moment here. Just so that you can kind of take a minute to make sense of all the things. Apologies, I was just grabbing a sip of water while you thought about this. So to explain this entire debate around what is voluntary and what is involuntary in the face of conflicting documentary evidence, I would probably try and sort of simplify this and use an example that perhaps many people in this audience may be able to relate to, especially women. So for young women in their 20s in India, pressure starts building up to get married and settle down. And if you look at the wedding rituals across almost all cultures in our country, they involve seeking the bride's consent in some form or the other. However, you will perhaps agree with me that effective or true consent requires analysis of other available options, which in turn depends on the social and economic status and the opportunities to become financially and emotionally independent, and family and social support networks available to women in our society. And so the issue of consent is far more complicated than looking at a document or a moment in time where your consent is sought and is received. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are 2 points that I'm making here. Firstly, that volition or consent is a characteristic not of a village or a family or a community. It's a characteristic of individuals. It's a matter of individual choice. And an individual decides her option out of a menu of available choices. This choice is not made in abstract or ideal terms. It's a choice that is made from a menu of available options and is often made under pressure from more powerful forces or individuals around you. So, when examining questions of volition or consent, it is extremely important to be vigilant about the processes followed in obtaining consent. And there's a large body of work in the social sciences on the complex relationship between the state and society and how does power actually operate, especially in upland, rural, agrarian, Adivasi contexts. And it's important to take these learnings into account when discussing issues of volition. The second point I'm making is that this is not simply an issue of some villagers as a collective, deciding to oppose the state. It's more complicated than that. Which segments of local villagers agree to a certain move? Who do they claim to represent? There are a lot of these questions, and to understand this, one must begin by acknowledging something that agrarian studies begins with, which is that rural and agrarian societies are deeply fractured and fragmented. And secondly, that the rural is increasingly linked to the urban and even the global through mobility of labor and capital. Thus, what happens in a given site is likely to be influenced by not just local, but also several extra local or non-local factors. So, to understand impacts of conservation or development projects on a particular location, it's important to ask questions about who would oppose the project, who would support it, which in turn are questions about who is likely to gain from the coming of the dam in this case, in terms of subcontracts for construction work or bribe for acting as a middleman or a gatekeeper between the state and less powerful citizens. And this division is not just across households, but also right within households, between women and men, between the aspirations of younger people and the expectations of older people, etc. So the point I'm making is that literature in the social sciences on the micropolitics of representation and collective action can provide us very important insights about issues of relocation, etc., if we are willing to shift our gaze to these kind of issues. I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A. So, from these 5 stories, it should be abundantly clear that even while the Kuno landscape is still waiting for Asiatic lions to arrive, the sanctuary and its surrounding landscape was not really frozen in time. It was undergoing a number of unintended transformations, and other kinds of unintended outcomes were similarly occurring, not just in Kuno, but also in places as diverse as Gir and Etawah and Delhi and Namibia. And this then brings me to this idea that I said I'll talk about, which is the anti-politics machine. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in his article and later in a book by the same name, James Ferguson gives us a very important insight, which is this, that the people who are tasked with doing development, and you can also apply this to conservation, very often try to address issues that are inherently political through technical solutions. So, for example, the deeply political process of creating a consensus around a particular model of development ends up becoming a technical exercise of creating a consent document. So, next slide, please. Here's a quote from James Ferguson where he explains the concept of the anti-politics machine, and he says that a development project or a conservation project, as I am arguing, is a kind of anti-politics machine, which on the model of the anti-gravity machine of science fiction stories, seems to suspend politics from even the most sensitive political operations at the flick of a switch. Uh, the bizarre thing here and the fascinating thing here is that the failure of the project itself becomes a justification for incurring even more expenses, to bring in even more experts, to collect even more data, to bring in more technology, better technology, and so on. And thus, an entire ecosystem or a sector is created in which a whole lot of well meaning but apparently apolitical individuals trying to do their own thing and trying to do it well get involved in lending their technical and scientific expertise towards making the initial idea, whether it's a dam or a conservation project, to make that initial idea work out. This results in rendering the problem technical and shifting our gaze from the inherently political nature of that exercise in its very conception. Next slide, please. So through these 5 short stories and the idea of politics and the anti-politics machine, I have tried to show you the multiple ways in which the issue of Asiatic Lion reintroduction has been rendered technical through scientific debates around the validity of reintroduction, lions versus tigers, and whether this will have conflicts, invasive versus indigenous species, animal welfare versus biodiversity conservation, African versus Asian cheetahs, etc. And now these debates have occupied researchers, wildlife activists, forest bureaucracies, and the judiciary. And I'm not arguing here that these debates are not important. What I'm saying instead is that in this process, what becomes obscured is the ongoing political struggles, say, between Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh around the issues of Adivasi livelihoods, development projects, and forced displacements, struggles that have gone on since the 1980s, at least, in the context of the Narmada Dam, the Sardar Sarovar Narmada project. Local resource struggles between local people and state functionaries, upper and lower caste farmers, landless and landed people, they also get rendered invisible in this sort of entire landscape of technical and scientific discussions. It is only when we consciously look out for how the politics and the anti-politics of lion reintroduction interact with each other that we will be able to make sense of the whole scenario and come up with more effective ways of going forward. So, summing up, I would say that in recent years, conservation science has begun to acknowledge and grapple with societal realities and politics to a much greater extent. And obviously, my presence here today is a striking testimony to this. And this has particularly been true of the SCCS. And yet, I think there is a long way to go. I believe that the way forward is to move towards truly interdisciplinary training of conservationists, which is aimed at bridging this sort of science and social science divide so that conservationists of the future are firmly equipped with the academic and the theoretical and the methodological tools that are required for them to make sense of the complex world that they have chosen, that you have chosen to be actors in. I don't think it's possible to understand conservation policy and practice without delving into the political economy of agrarian and rural livelihoods and the political ecology of conservation itself. In our work, for example, at the School of Human Ecology at Ambedkar University Delhi, my colleagues and we come from the natural and the social sciences, we are trying to do exactly this. We're trying to build new interdisciplinary pedagogies so that we can train future conservation leaders who are equipped with a wider variety of theoretical and methodological tools to do more effective and more socially just conservation. And we do this because we are convinced that conservation efforts don't play out in a vacuum. They are deeply affected by the overall relationship between the state, society, markets, and between land, labor, livelihoods, and non-human species. We recognize that the state as well as society are not monolithic entities. They are multi-layered, they are complex, and the actors, people like us, people like government servants and bureaucrats and politicians, all of us have a range of interests, out of which conservation may or may not be one. So we are all actors with a very specific position in these debates. Therefore, doing effective conservation and equitable conservation requires a much deeper familiarity with work in the social sciences that helps you to shift gaze and understand these ideas. And doing so can equip the next generation of conservationists with very important tools to make sense of conservation landscapes and the local and the extra local factors that influence policy and practice. This will be very useful to help us to understand why real world conservation practice sometimes seems to defy all logic. And instead of just saying, I don't know why this is happening, we will have the tools to figure out, I think maybe this is happening. And this will help us to engage more widely with the sort of range of actors in conservation, including the media, research organizations, NGOs, corporate donors, eco-tour operators, apart from, of course, government servants and politicians, with more and better understanding and empathy. So I think that this is vital if we want to go beyond the rhetoric of conservation into the real motives and drivers of the people and the situations that you are likely to encounter in the field. And these are situations that you will not be able to see and make sense of unless you are aware of the need to shift the gaze and to look for hidden transcripts and for unintended outcomes. And I think that this is vital for making conservation more effective and more equitable going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
much. I
much.
was in time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Asmita. We will have the Q&A for another 10 minutes. So participants, please start entering your questions in the Q&A tab. We're already seeing a few questions come in, Asmita. Would you like to take them one at a time, or can I read out a few?
It'll be great if you can read them out, then I won't be peering short-sightedly at the screen.
Sure. No, I'll read them out.
Yeah,
okay, so the first question is, how do we understand the multipolarity of power present in conservation politics, and how do they negotiate the same political sphere? Can you reflect on your experience in the Kuno landscape? And a sort of connected question, are apolitical and anti-political the same? For me, suspension of politics is not always the same in being apolitical and being anti-political. So it's somewhat similar to apathy and ignorance, is the analogy that's being drawn.
Very interesting. And thank you for those questions. I'll take the second one first, which is about, apolitical versus anti-political. Now, I would think that actually, I believe that I'm sort of trying to understand where the question is coming from. And anti-political, I would think, is this idea that we associate with politics usually being bad, and is something that I would actually urge people to think beyond, because as actors in the conservation story, we don't really have the option of being either apolitical or anti-political. I mean, the very fact that we've chosen to work for conservation and taken particular viewpoints or standpoints in our conservation means that uh, our own politics is closely intertwined with what we have chosen to do. So, when we discuss the sort of 101 of political ecology, we kind of position political ecology as an explicit acknowledgement of the politics in conservation. I would argue that it's not possible to be either apolitical or anti-political, even if they're two different things. Uh, the only options we have are to be blind to our politics or to actually acknowledge our politics and then work with it. And sometimes acknowledging our politics can actually make us work around it. So when I went into the Kuno landscape, 22 years ago, I went in thinking that, lion conservation is important, and so are tribal livelihoods. And let me see if we can figure out ways in which the two can happen without clashing with each other. And, when I look back at the kind of work that Sanrakshan Trust did in the Kuno landscape in our early years, I found that that's exactly what we were trying to do. We were trying to sort of look out for the gaps in the relocation process and try and help to plug those gaps and, sort of work with the idea of lion reintroduction. But over the years, I mean, as I've tried to show through these vignettes, my own understanding of what was going on, which suggestions that we give will get acknowledged or accepted, which ones won't, which will work in the local community and which ones will not, what will work at a small scale but get completely messed up when it's scaled up for the larger sort of rural landscape. All these understandings started to get far more complex, and tied up with this is my own personal journey, where I was trained in economics, which is one of the social sciences that is, mainstream economics is extremely apolitical. We start with, our first class in undergrad economics tells us that we are not going to get into the normative aspects. But since I was interested in actually doing conservation and, socially just conservation on the ground, I found that it's not possible to do this. You have to grapple with the politics of it. And you can't just grapple with the politics of it in a very, when I say grapple with the politics, I don't mean taking a stand and then sort of, going out and sort of. So I'm distinguishing between being political and being an activist. An activist position is one of the ways to be political, but an engagement with the theoretical framings or understandings of who is the state, the conservation state at the Ministry of Environment level at the center and the forest guard on the ground. Do they actually share the same mandate? These are some of the things that when we study in theory, it actually gives us many more spaces for action, of which activism or confrontational activism is one. But one finds that there are many more ways to engage if we sort of make the politics visible rather than letting it slide from our gaze. I don't know if that answers you, but yeah, that's what I have to say on this for now.
And for the first question, Asmita, about how do we understand how power negotiates within the same political sphere? And how do we engage with conservation? How do we understand that sector, the political sector? Can you reflect on your experience in Kuno? But also connected to that is the fact that a second question that's been asked is that as scientists, whether it's as a social scientist or whether as a natural scientist, you are taught to maintain a certain distance from the subjects that you study. So how have you also continually negotiated your positionality when you are intervening versus studying some of these human ecological landscapes? And you answered it a little bit, but if you can go into...
Yeah. I can't, because I would just, my question to you would be, how many hours do I have? I mean, I spent 2 years with students at the master's program in environment and development, picking up any of these ideas and discussing them in detail, you know. So it will require us to have a much longer conversation where we would want to actually say, you know, when I say politics, what do I mean? When I say state, what do I mean? When I say community, what do I mean? You know, and in each of these, there are so many different sort of, you know, viewpoints and ideas that it's actually not possible to give you a quick fix answer at, you know, in the -3 minutes that I have. I believe the session got over officially at 12 o'clock. So I would actually invite a much longer engagement. Some of what I have to say on this, I've written, of course. So, I mean, you know, shameless self-promotion, but there is lots that I've written on this in the context of Kuno. And I'm now writing in the sort of, you know, reflecting on the wider idea of politics and conservation. So, you know, please look at that to see what I have to say in more detail on this. And also, I invite you to write to me in case there's sort of, you know, pressing questions, burning questions that you want me to address.
Great. Thank you so much, Asmita. So students, please feel free to contact Asmita to have these conversations in more detail. One last question, and then we can end this session. Why are some conservation projects more influenced by political agendas than they are ecological agendas? Maybe this is the reason behind conservationists keeping their distance from politics. What's your view on this?
Simple question, conservation itself is a political agenda. Because any project of conservation is based on this moral idea that certain things are worth saving. And the point is that this is not an idea that exists outside of the humans that believe in that idea. And the humans that believe in that idea have to then sort of justify the use of landscapes for in the service of their idea, as opposed to in the service of, say, the idea of mining in that landscape or something else, or agriculture in that landscape, or hunting, right? So I think that that's the binary that I'm trying to sort of encourage people to break, that there is conservation and then there is politics. The idea that lions need to be saved, that a second home for them needs to be created, that, you know, monkeys need to be freed from zoos. All of these are ideas that are held inside the bodies and minds of humans. And those humans have a certain class position in society. And that class position is not something that is shared by others. And so conservation itself is inherently political. If we think of it as apolitical, we are deluding ourselves. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say, that it's better to say up front that my politics needs to be more widespread, because I believe these are the reasons why conservation needs to happen. And then let us engage with others who may not think so. And so there is no apolitical conservation. That's the point. And that is what I'm trying to push conservationists, particularly people trained in the science of conservation, to do. That if this is something you're doing, you know, for the sort of gentle joy of research, it's a different matter. But if you actually want to go out there and make a difference, then you do have to think of why you're doing what you're doing. And you will come to the understanding that the answer is political.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Asmita. I think that's been an amazing introduction to students on this concept, but also on the vast expanse of social science literature that's available to them that they should be delving into when they're entering this field of conservation, whether it's about biopower, whether it's about development-induced development, and also just generally the ideas around political economy, political ecology, so that they can understand when they step into these spaces how power operates, and can slowly begin, I guess, to shift their gaze, as you have said. So thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and coming to SCCS. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you over the years. So
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so just announcements for students. The next session is Birds of a Feather. So please go to the Birds of a Feather tab on the platform and join one of the many discussions that will be starting. So see you in the discussions. And then after that, we have, of course, a break, and we will be starting with our student talks in the afternoon. Student presenters are requested to come and join the session 20 minutes in advance. So by 2:40, student presenters, please come and join the session. The rest of the participants, we will see you at 3 o'clock. In the same way that you join the plenary session, come to the live sessions tab, scroll down to the student talks session and join the session. So see you next at Birds of a Feather. Thank you, everyone.